And then the one on the right is the successful one. Two things will stand out straight away. They're aesthetically not super, they're not super pleasing. They're not super pretty. Danielle's definitely looks a lot prettier than this. So don't look at mine from like the point of view of having it pretty, but I think it might be at least clear. Another thing that stands out is, to me, looking back at this, is that my 2016 one is 4 pages long. My 2019 one is 3 pages long. So despite adding 3 years of science, I reduced 1 page of CV. So definitely some fluff in the initial one. And my feeling now would be that probably just coming out of your PhD CV probably doesn't need to be more than 2 pages, I would say. And so definitely we can look at mine and see a bit of fluff. So I guess going through it, all this stuff here, I would remove. I don't think it's just knowing what you're interested in. I don't think people don't care what you're interested in. They care what you're published in and what you've proposed. You know, like, you don't need to put your high school, to be honest. I mean there's already like, you've already done undergrad, maybe an honors or masters or something, and a PhD. No one gives a shit that you were at high school. They kind of assume that. No one needs to know that I speak a little bit of French. It's probably unnecessary for a job in. Actually, this one I think I used also for some things in Switzerland, so maybe then it's helpful. But otherwise in America, I don't think that's super important. Unless you were like, if you're a fluent speaker, sure. But then, you know, I also had these more junior research positions, which I've since gotten rid of. I think, though, that if you're a student, I would probably keep these. You know, particularly in America, people do all these like summer research things and stuff. And I would definitely actually keep those on a CV, even though I've now don't use them. I think that was still good to have back then. The observational experience, I mean, is definitely good to have, but I think could have been clearer. What I now say is if I now actually cover on the right, I actually just say, I've got this many nights of telescope time. It's a lot clearer. I think it's a lot more obvious to a panel. Obviously, of course, you know, as a PhD student, you're not going to have had time to maybe PI proposals or grants, but you might have been a co-I on a grant that your supervisor was on, and definitely add that in, okay? If I go, and then, so yeah, back here. So academic service, I think important. Sometimes in your PhD, you might get lucky and you get to referee a paper, 100% add that. And I think also public outreach stuff, I think is also important. Awards and scholarships. Yeah, I think, yeah, this is all university stuff. Again, I wouldn't have high school stuff, but university stuff I think is reasonable. Invited colloquias and seminars, I think it's good. Again, these days I don't put poster presentations on it. But if you know, in your PhD, you haven't gone to that many, so sure, you can put posters. I think that's fine. Maybe you might want to just have like a list of conferences attended and just list them all together, and then in brackets put poster, so it doesn't like scream out poster on it. Probably didn't mean to mention that I was a cricket coach, although I was a bloody good one. And probably that's all complete fluff. I mean, that's the type of stuff you see in a more professional one, where, you know, you're going for a professional job. It's probably not quite certain what skills you have, but in academia, they know you know how to use LaTeX and some form of programming. So I don't think that's important. For the publications, this was discussed, I think, in one of the job workshops the other day. I think definitely split up your first author and other author ones, you know, particularly in exoplanets, or particularly in astronomy, you're going to have lots of big collaboration papers, and, you know, you might be lucky to have your name as 30th author on a whole bunch of papers. But I think it is important to really show out the ones where like you were the lead. And then conference proceedings. I think writing conference proceedings are pretty rare these days, to be honest. And I think I've only done one since this. I don't include them now, but I think if you're not going to have as many papers during a PhD, I think including them on your CV initially is okay. And so I'll just quickly cover the new one, the things I think that have improved. I think it looks a little bit prettier, but honestly not that much. And definitely when I go to like do faculty job applications, I'll want to pretty this up. But definitely it's more succinct. Like I don't blab on about all this crap in my undergrad. You just put the dates and the thesis title and maybe the GPA. I think a very big one to stand, this is probably something Danielle will cover because Danielle has won a lot of money, is put how much money, like particularly, I mean, it's maybe not as much for a postdoc, but for a faculty thing, they want to know that you can bring in your own money. And I think you can put on grants where you are not the PI as long as you're clear. Like this one here, I was a co-I, but it's still, you've still contributed to the science of winning a grant. And then again, telescope time, be very clear as to how much time you got, and also were you the PI? I think that's very important. The colloquies and seminars, I think, is the same as what I had before. Obviously, it's just a longer list after more years. Academic service, kind of the same thing. As you get in more things, you can kind of pare down the stuff that's less important. But I really think that, I think as a postdoc, you really can squeeze a CV into 2 pages without publications. And then the publications is, it's just the same thing, basically. It's got a few more on it and gotten rid of the conference proceedings. For those who aren't aware, an H-index it's not the best metric ever, but I think it's the most commonly used. It just means that I have at least 10 papers with at least 10 citations. So if you've put out 20 papers that no one gives a crap about and never get cited, you'll have an H-index of maybe 0. So that's kind of a common one. However, of course, the H-index doesn't say anything about whether you're first author or 50th author. So it's not the most important. And the last thing I'll say is maybe, to be honest, an improvement, I would maybe separate this into 3. I would maybe put like first author, and then I would put significant contribution. So sort of second, third, or even slightly later author, but if you really did something. So say, for example, this guy here, I think I was 6th author, but I did a significant contribution. Whereas this one here, I was again like 6th or 7th author, but I did very little. So maybe separating those. I think that's about all I'd want to share about these. Do you have any questions at all? That's sort of pretty informal here, I guess, but yeah, any questions?
I have a question. How do you assess if you made a significant contribution to the paper? Is that like, should you check that out with the first author of the paper? Is that totally up to you? Like how much time you spend on it, even though it didn't end up being a huge part of the paper?
My metric has been, and this was something my mum gave me. She said, can you defend it at a conference? Could you defend this paper at a conference? And so I would, this test guy, I have spoken about at conferences and I feel very comfortable speaking about it. I didn't do as much technical work on it as some of the lead authors, and that's why I'm a little lower down the list. But this second guy, the Coralie survey one, I took some observations and I proofread the paper. So that would be my metric.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a very good metric because if you could present the content of the paper at a conference, then, and also you feel confident that you can explain the detail of the paper and answer some tough questions of other people ask about this subject. And I think you made a significant contribution. And also I would argue that you should add one additional category, which is like second author and the significant contributors. And then that will make it clear to other people, like among the papers that you are not first author, how many of them you have, made a significant contribution. And sometimes people will look at those to see what other skill set you may have and what other big project you are involved and make a significant contribution. That is quite helpful in distinguishing people who marginally contribute to a lot of project and the people who have significant contribute to a certain big project.
Yeah, and I think, and one thing that's, again, if you're a PhD student right now, it's probably not super relevant, but were you the advisor of a student? And I think you, put it in the significant author category, but maybe like bracket it, say, student paper, like a student-led paper that you're the advisor of. I think if your students get first author papers and you're a postdoc or even an experienced PhD student, that's good, and you should highlight that. I didn't have this at this point, but yeah, I would in the future.
Yeah, additional category would be student mentored, right? So that showcase your mentoring skill as a postdoc.
Could you explain again the H index?
Sure. So the H index is, I'll give the definition, then I'll maybe give an example. So an H index, let's say of 6, I have conference proceedings don't count. So I have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 papers, but 6 of them have at least 6 citations. And that is why I have an H index of 6. So 3 of these guys are kind of, I don't know, like dead weight, as in like, I mean, they might also be very new papers that haven't gotten citations, or maybe they're an old paper that's just not picked up much interest and they would not contribute to your H index. And so people they might end up being paper limited, as in they put out a small quantity of papers, but those papers get cited a lot. And so they've got a small H index because of that. Or
can I jump in for 1 sec?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, the really simple thing to do is if you take your refereed publications and you sort them by citations. You go down the line from your top number of citations until, just like David said, the number on that list equals or is greater than, the number of citations on that paper. So like David just said, if he has 6, if he goes down to his number 7 paper, it's going to have less than 7 citations. And so that's why his H index is 6. So it stops wherever that number is equal or becomes less than when you sort them. When you sort them by, I know I had to do it visually before I understood what an H index was. So yeah, you just sort them in order of citation number.
But just to be clear though, observers have higher H indexes than theorists, because theorists do a small amount of papers with 2-3 authors. Observers, particularly in exoplanets, get to be a part of the Kepler collaboration. And I know PhD students with H indexes of like 30 because they've got a whole bunch of like Kepler papers or something where they were a non-significant contribution. I mean,
that's also only true if you're in a group though, David. Like I'm not in any big groups. And so there's lots of theorists that have more papers than me because they're not themselves individually writing proposals, taking all the observations. And so, yeah, it is very different depending on your subfield or your I guess is maybe what you should say. So
sure. I think that's much better. Yeah. And to be honest, and like I'll be honest, I've never like sat on a panel looking at people's CVs and seeing which one is better. So I have no idea, to be honest, how important your H index comes into this. But it's just a go-to metric.
I don't know if Gia has been on a hiring panel, but the thing that I've heard, so I don't know how true this is, but as a minimum, that you aren't really considered for faculty applications until you have an H index above 10. Now it wildly varies, obviously, from there, but you have to have kind of some minimum threshold to show that you've established yourself in the field. I don't know if you have any experience on that, or that's just what I've heard.
I would. My experience is that usually people do not pay too much attention to H index. They would rather pay more attention to the length of your publication list, how many first, second author you have published, and the amount of funding you have drawn at the stage of faculty application. And at the stage of postdoc application, most of the time they look at the length of the publication and your role in a project. For example, if you involve in a case for Sam Johnson, if you're involved in W first, then people will say good things about you, and you publish a good list, and the W first will be a future important project that will place a lot of strength on your application. So that is just one case.
Yeah. So that's something I was going to ask too. Is like, so it seems like, I mean, like any statistic, H-index is obviously like has its pluses and minuses. So it seems like what are thoughts on playing to your strengths with like when it comes to those statistics? Like if you have a very high, like some people put like first author H-index because they have a very high first author, like or like just H-index, they have a large H-index, but their first author is small, so they leave it out, sort of thing. So is there like is that just sort of, do you want to just play to your strengths when writing a CV, or is it a little more nuanced than that?
Well, sure, you want to play emphasize your strength, but you don't want it to be too obnoxious. Like if you make it really specific, I'm the person in the W first collaboration has the highest H-index. So if you place a lot of constraint, people will think you're kind of fine tuning or picking up something that is not really, that matters. But if you say, if I publish a significant amount of first author paper that got cited a lot, yes, for sure, you can mention that in the CV. And another thing that I've seen people done is that they also include how many citations their papers are. Like that's also another metrics about how important or how appreciated your work among the community. So if you have papers that are highly cited, or if you're in a collaboration with a paper highly cited, then I think that is something to be emphasized.
And I think this also connects with your letter of reference. So let's say I knew people that were more engineers, like maybe they were building a spectrograph or something, and so they spent 4 years being an engineer and they didn't have a lot of publications because they were doing engineering-y stuff, but could still get good postdocs with a very low H-index, but that would also come into your letter of reference, to say, hey, look, this guy is an amazing, did a lot of time being an amazing engineer. That's why he's maybe not published as much. I mean, if you want to talk about you're talking about like what you mentioned, the H-index sort of needed to get put in the door for faculty job. And we can talk about that with, I have this sort of paper for the Hubble stuff with the stats, but I think maybe leave it for now because we can maybe come back to that in the questions or something. I think the last thing I'll just mention, since people are talking about these specifics, is I don't have any in prep papers on the CV. This came up a lot. I have this guy here, this test one was under review and submitted, and I think to give a date to say like I submitted this like a month before the Hubble application. I was probably hoping it would be out in archive before the Hubble panel met. It wasn't, but yeah, those only things that were submitted and under review, or maybe like this one up here, this was accepted at the time but not yet published. But I didn't have any prep ones on the CV. Now you might, if you've got a like 90% towards submission paper, you might want to mention your research proposal as an in prep. Particularly,
you can also say available upon request if it really is there.
Yeah, exactly. It should be something that you could send and they would expect a 90% finished paper with a few typos. So if there's no more questions for me, maybe I'll tune over to Samson. Maybe we actually just lost. I think Samson might have actually gone disconnected. Oh wait, no, there he is.
No, yeah, Samson is there.
No, sorry, I was looking at the wrong screen. That's sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. G, do we have time? Or what is our time frame looking like? Like I can go quick. I don't have much to say. I can show you what I have for a CV.
Yeah, if you go ahead. Spend the next 5 minutes or so for your okay. Just to go through.
Yeah. So mine is structured a little bit differently. And so for context, I think this is especially pertinent towards grad students right now. The main thing that I would emphasize is we have these like the grad student checklist you're supposed to fill out like every semester, every like few months or whatever. Definitely keep that up to date because it makes building CVs and things like that a lot easier. So keeping like in these, just for people who don't know, it has like updates on what you're working on, outreach activities you've done, service things, and courses you've taken, courses you've taught, and such like that. So it's just a nice record. Keeping something like that throughout grad school, it's way easier to refer back to that than try and remember, back to your second year of grad school. Was that, one thing what class you taught, stuff like that. So it's nice to have that to go off of. And so I just did a few little updates this morning, is sort of just like what I have for a CV right now is sort of the long form one that I'm going to, depending on what jobs I'm applying to, take things away from or add things to. So first off, I just have like education. I've chosen to do like awards and scholarships with each university. I think that's sort of a taste or like up to your taste. You want to include that in a later section. And then publications. I just put co-author, some of them. I was thinking about changing it up. So like I did some, my undergrad work was on a project called Minerva. And I was wondering, I think I might, put all my Minerva publications together and then other publications and sort of like sort them by subject because I'm a little all over the place. But there's that. I have employment, which I guess is sort of like research positions. I took a year off and then other positions held that weren't during grad school, advising, mentoring, service, outreach, and then observing experience and conferences and workshops. So it's pretty like it's basically the same thing. I include a lot of dates. I don't know if that doesn't matter, but this sort of my structure. And as I said, like my thing is going to be like pulling things out, putting things in where they might be applicable. That's all I really have to say about that. I also, I guess like when I do conferences, I'd say like whether I was like an attendee, if I had a talk, or if I had like a poster, just sort of in line rather than splitting up into two different sections. That's really the difference. But yeah, that's all I have. I think I'm more curious for the workshop part, for building a CV.
So I think, Sam, what you present here is basically a master CV, right? Because depending on like which institution you are applying to, what position you are applying to, you can kind of rearrange the different blocks to place them forward or place them in a like more later as a later section in the CV. So for example, if you apply for a postdoc, you probably want to emphasize your publication. And I like that you place your honors or prize along with each institution you have been. I think that's nice because when if you, as a grad student, people usually look for kind of, have you received any like poster prize or any like things like fellowship, university fellowship or national fellowship. So it's nice to emphasize at the front of the page so that it will, that stand out as, how much your work has been appreciated by the community. And so, so I think the point is that depending on like where you're applying to, you probably want to rearrange your CV so that the things that you want to emphasize that are placed at the very beginning of the CV.
I guess we should emphasize that. I don't know. So for starters, I think this is a much prettier looking CV than what I had out of my PhD. But in terms of like, depends where you're applying. I think we are still only talking within the realm of academia though, because, I haven't applied for an academia job, but I'm speaking with academics who transition to that. All that publication stuff goes into like one line, which is maybe a bit depressing, but you're definitely not listed.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I was told from people who got good non-academic jobs, it was like, I have first authored 5 papers and co-authored 5. That's it. Like, which is maybe a bit depressing, but I mean, we're talking about academic ones for now, but yeah. I mean, if other people have experience of actually applying, then please add in, but yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, I'll stop sharing and we can move on.
Thank you, Sam. And Danielle, would you like to share some of your experience like developing your CV and your tips?
Sounds good. So I'm going to take the risk of just sharing my desktop. So sorry for a second that you'll see your own faces. Oh, that went away. Great. So I just took a couple of quick notes, and they echo a lot of the things that have already been said. And I'm going to show you a couple of versions of evolution of my CV. So this was already mentioned, keeping things up to date. I actually physically keep my CV. I modify it kind of as anything big happens, because it's amazing how quickly you forget what the name of a conference was, or, a proposal you wrote or whatever. When you get to the faculty application stage, or this is something that I sat down with Todd Thompson, and he said, basically you're going to be looking at your applications to kind of check at least a minimum amount in each of these three boxes. Research, which has to do with both your publications and your funding, or grant writing, or computer time, or something of that nature. Teaching and mentoring, so something of that nature, and then service work. And so that also motivated me as I was thinking about making and adjusting my CV, and if there was anything little I could do in preparation for coming up to this stage of, like, am I a member of the AAS? Am I a member of the International Astronomical? Just little things you can even add just to make sure that you look well-rounded. Ji was just talking about this, organizing sections based on job. That's really important. So my faculty application looks very different than my postdoc application. So I'll show that to you in a second. I'll also show you how I very much changed the layout, and mine is actually quite a bit longer now for my faculty application, so that I could make things really easy to find based on what people are looking for. So this is something I think to think about even in postdoc applications too, is they might look at your CV in a lot of detail if you make it into the top, however many. But when they first get their giant chunk of applications, they're looking through these things quite quickly, and probably for something that's important to them specifically. They're looking for a couple of bullet point details. They're not reading all the details of your CV unless you make it to the top of their list. And so you want to make sure you stand out and make those things easy to find. I'll also show, Samson asked about highlighting your selling points. I'm going to show you how I did that in my faculty application, because I wasn't publishing for several years at a rate that is as high as some other people. People often said that was my weakest link. And so I highlighted things to compensate for that. And I think it worked out well. And then we talked about how much detail to have for things. There are some places where you're going to want to add more details that I was surprised about, because I tried to cut down my length, and then people gave me feedback of, like, for instance, I taught for a year at a small liberal arts college that no one else is going to know about. So I have to tell them, what is this college? They actually focused on teaching and mentoring. I taught these types of courses for this many hours a week. So you give them some extra information to make sure they understand what you're telling them. And then also you beef up certain things that you want to highlight. So where I've mentored students, for instance, I'll show you like some of their accomplishments so that I can highlight, not just like, oh, I mentored them, but I actually can back that up. I'll also show you that I created links to my own ADS library, my ORC ID, and to Google Scholar. So these are all different ways people will look at your productivity, and by making that easily accessible for them, that's really good. And then I would also suggest that you have people proofread your CV, like look it over, because I found that the ways that I organized or worded certain things didn't come across the way I thought they did. People were confused or whatever. So definitely get as much feedback as you can. So when I was a postdoc, I'll just show you that, you know, my CV looked more like this. We've kind of seen this type of structure where I had academic appointments, my education, awards, publications, programs, research programs and grants, talks and presentations. You know, it's kind of a very generic outline. I have my programming experience like David did.
Super Mongo.
Yeah. For me, I've done a lot of observational astronomy, and then I have my letter writers. So that's that. I got much prettier when I made my faculty application. So by the way, I made this one in LaTeX, and then I got really frustrated with some of the limitations. So I ended up making mine in Word, which is also frustrating, but I think it ended up looking a lot better. So I'm going to show you a draft. This next one is not what I ended up with, but I just want to show you that the next version that I made looks a lot different. But some of the feedback I got here that was that like my color scheme and things like that looked a little too non-professional for what I was trying to go for. I'm a very loud, bright person, so I wanted some of that to come across, but this also, you know, I got that feedback and found a happy medium of what worked. So my final CV for job applications looked like this.
Ah, so pretty. I'm blinded.
So I worked on and chose, you know, a very simple branding of myself that is repeated throughout my entire application materials.
And you should have db.com under your name.
Have what?
db.com. Because you have DB, right? Because you
Right.
also need a website for you, like db.com. For
My website's danielleaberg.com, so it's good enough.
And the website has the same branding now.
Yeah, the website, I'm very proud of my website, but that's for a different day. So for a faculty application, I do think it's still important to just kind of give a little brief overview or highlight what you study, just so that, you know, you're applying, you know, when you apply for postdocs, you're typically, if you're applying for a fellowship, this might still be relevant. If you're applying to a specific postdoc, then they already know you're applying to do that work. I mean, so you should be relevant to that. But here I'm trying to give a broader overview of, you know, who I am, what I do, to someone who might not know what I study or who I am. Now here I put a summary in. This is done pretty more commonly in like a business world. And so this took some finessing, because when I first did it, people said it read too much like a business world, but they really liked it in the end. So here I'm just highlighting what I think my main strengths are throughout my CV, which was challenging for me to do. But I highlight, you know, some of these big numbers or my big accomplishments. For me, my biggest thing is I have a lot of funding, so I put that up top. My papers, I've been a part of a fair amount of projects, so I do have an H-index now of 18 or 19. But for me, I have a famous paper, so a paper that has more than 100 citations. And so, you know, I really tried to highlight that I've been cited, that I've been well known, despite, you know, the fact that I haven't written a bazillion papers. They've been well cited, well received. So you can see that as I go through this, that my structure has changed a little bit. So I just very briefly highlight my academic appointments and my education. And then, as I said, because my funding has been probably where I've been most successful, that's the next thing that I highlight. David mentioned, you know, giving dollar amounts for all these different things. And so I split mine up into awards that I was the PI of and awards that I was a part of. And then additional programs that didn't come with funding, but that came with maybe observing time, both PI and co-I programs. So I split them up by funding as well. Next, for me, I have my talks and presentations, because another big strength when you get to the faculty stage is they want you to be known, right? You're representing their university. So they want you to be invited to things, to people to know who you are. And so another strength of mine is I have a lot of invited talks. And so I split mine up into invited talks and other talks. And at this stage, I no longer have posters on here, but obviously it's by stages. So these things change as you go along. Then I highlight my on-site observing experience, because I have a crap ton of that. And then student mentoring, again, for a faculty position is, you know, teaching and mentoring is a big deal. So this is where I said I gave some more details, you know, like highlighting, you know, different aspects of what they did or what I was able to do for them. kind of shows that I was more involved, that I sent them to a workshop, that they presented at a AAS, that they, this led to their senior thesis, that they, got different awards. Ness has gotten lots of different awards, which has been great. So kind of showing off those different things. It's weird how like when I first wrote this up, I didn't have any of that and I had to like dig deep and think about what the details were, but it really helps people know that you did more with that. And then again, like I said, they don't know where I taught before. So I gave them more details on like, this is what this university is. This is the details of what I actually taught. So this is something I didn't have before either. These are science collaborations that I'm a part of with websites, one of which I am the PI of or have played major roles in. So that's another thing to show that you have breadth, that you do individual stuff, but you're also on a larger stage. You're part of bigger things. So again, trying to show how you can be as well-rounded as possible. Service and inclusivity. So starting to think about sitting on review panels. If you've never, I think I did my first one like the month. I got asked to referee my first paper the month after I got my PhD. So if you haven't had that experience, do not worry about it. But know that after you graduate, this is stuff you can start to think about, and you can ask to do it. You can reach out to them and say, hey, I'm interested in being on a panel. I'm interested in being in your list to referee papers, because I know sometimes John gets frustrated that I get asked to do so much more than him as a woman. And so if you feel like you're lacking in that experience or you haven't been asked, then tell them that, hey, you want to do it. And they usually need people. So.
And on NASA and the NSF website, you can actually sign up to be a panelist or a reviewer for their proposals. So all those things are public, like there should be links to sign up to be a reviewer. So and I think I just want to jump in here. So you can see that there are many things that are listed by Danielle. They're very important to showcase your research experience, showcase your collaboration, showcase your various aspects of strength. So now, as a more junior people, like a grad student, now it's time to think about which of the above areas you are lacking. And then that's probably what you want to spend time to fill in that section, so that by the time you apply for postdoc, you look like a more well-rounded person than you are now. So it's also a way of self-reflection to think about where you are lacking and where needs to be improved. So I think it's developing a CV as early as possible also help you to identify your strengths and weaknesses.
And so then I will just also comment that my papers are last. That was something that was recommended to me, not for postdoc phase, but just to keep this in mind once you go to the next stage, that probably someone knows who you are or they don't. And it's easy for them to look you up for papers, whereas those other things aren't easy for them to find. And that's why you highlight some of those things easier or earlier. As Ji suggested, I have my first author publications. I have papers that I made significant contributions for. Often I'm either like second or third author because I played a major role, or, some of these papers, it's like I did significant calculations or something like that for their work. So I played some sort of significant role. And then I have other ones where I was a contributing author. And because I spent time out of my postdoc to participate in the decadal process, I also put my white papers on there, show that I did service, and also just to show like what I've been doing with my time. So the other thing, again, you can see that I put a new summary up here to remind them of what I did in a bunch of different ways. And I just wanted to show you, in case you weren't familiar, you haven't done this yet, what an ADS library looks like. Of course, now this is, do you know what it is? I don't know why. I don't know if anyone else has had this process, but I haven't been able to open, ADS on my Safari all of a sudden. So yeah, Chrome works. So anyways, it would take them to my library where I've linked all my papers. And so, of course, like we talked about earlier, you can sort by citation count. So now it starts with my most highly cited paper. And I want to note that in your H-index, it includes papers that you're on, right? So my third paper is by Evan Skillman. And then I go down, these numbers are decreasing. I go down until I hit, so you see my 18th paper still has more than 18 citations, but my 19th paper only has 15. So my H-index is 18. And then within this, they can easily also go to the metrics, which does all this for you anyways. So for instance, it tells you about like total numbers of citations that you have of refereed papers, total citations, average citations per paper. It gives you all these nice things. And so that can help you just look to see what your strengths are and what you might want to highlight. And then it shows you your different indexes over time and tells you what your H-index is too. So this is a nice way for them to easily see or confirm these things or do whatever they want. So getting something like this is set up is really good.
Yeah, I would say the ADS library is super helpful. In addition to the advantages that Daniel mentioned, it's also very useful for people who have very common last name, like Wang or Johnson or Sun. So people usually have a very hard time finding my papers. So I also spend time to craft my ADS list to handpick my paper without other people's paper. So so that's very useful. And also the metrics page is also useful because they immediately give other people a sense of how significant your work is based on a variety of metrics. So yeah, it's nice to have a link to an ADS library and the Google citation, which I think everybody should do.
I think those are all the basic things I wanted to say.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. I think you set a new standard for CV writing. I would like to get a template to update my CV too. So we have about
I just wanted to mention really quick that if anyone is interested in that format or seeing it more, it's available on my website. So you can always just download it and make, do something that's your own.
Good. Yeah. So in the next 10 minutes, we have clinic or Q&A. If you have questions, ask. This is a good time to ask whatever confusion or questions you have for developing your CV, or if you want to, present your CV, have other people share their thought. This is also a good time. So go ahead.
Hi, Scrippers. I was wondering, is it okay if I'd like to share mine and get some feedback?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Can y'all see it?
Yeah, we can see it. Okay. So yeah, Caprice. So based on what David, Sam, and Daniel have said in the past 50 minutes or so, what would you like to improve? How would you like to improve your CV? And first of all, I would like to hear your opinion.
I don't know. I think it'd be good to have those links to ADS and different things. I only have one paper, so it's one thing on there, but and then yeah, I don't know. A lot of the stuff is I'm not at that level yet, so I don't really know besides that. I don't know. Yeah, I just wanted to be more to see like Daniel was saying if it made sense to other people, because you spend a long time looking at your CV this looks fine, and other people like what is this, whatever, what is this thing you're talking about, And so like that just like clarity and like different things where like things like I guess like don't matter and like shouldn't like be on there, like you guys like opinion for stuff is like kind of my thoughts initially from what has been.
So one thing that jumps out at me right away that I also sort of ran into is like I took a gap year and did research work. But something similar that happened is when you have a summary. So here for the third point under research experience, you've got like 3 things. I found that I had the same thing where like each of my research experiences, I tried to like write a bunch of detail. I might try and shorten that if possible. Or unless you're like, I found that like I when I was applying to grad school, actually, I was like, oh, I have all this written, that's already in my statement. They don't need duplicate information, sort of thing. But I left enough to be able them to tie the research statement to the CV. I think that's an important point we haven't hit yet, is like the CV is just like the first page, or like one of the first things they'll look at, needs to tie into the rest of, I would assume it needs to tie into the rest of the application package. Right. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then I just had like these things and like just a couple of observing like experience. Sorry, I don't know like how fast like I should like move or like anything for like this clinic. I've never been to CV clinic, so
I think it's that I think this speed is okay. We can scroll down your CV just to have a first impression of what it looks like, and then we can chime in to see what needs to be improved.
Can I ask a quick question? So could you please go up to the like TAing part of your CV? Yes, do you guys think is that okay? Is that too much detail, or like should you just kind of compress it to one line per class that you TA'd, or do you have any thoughts about that?
My opinion is that it can be shortened if it's an application for a postdoc, right? If it's a teaching college, you want to expand, like want to say, like clearly say your portfolio of teaching. So here, something can be shortened. If it's a long list, you could also do something that's similar that Danielle does, which has a summary, like how many courses you have taught or TA'd and how many students you have mentored, or things like that. So the TA session, I think it could be shortened. And the other thing that I want to say is that like the other experience, like National Park Service, Sequoia National Park. So here is like where we need to draw a line between like professional experience and life experience. So I think this is a super interesting life experience, but whether or not to take to put them in your professional CV, I think
a lot of these things are great. They just need to be packaged as outreach, as service and outreach. So
right. So I think exactly. So depending on how you brand the things you have done, these things definitely can be put in the outreach and make a very strong outreach section. But the way you arrange now is kind of make it I think it's kind of a mixture of academic stuff and non-academic stuff. But if you could turn non-academic stuff into outreach, then I think that will make the CV stronger.
Okay.
Right. And also that reminds me of David's CV, which is the cricket coach, right?
Yeah. Well, but I think that, I mean, we understand that cricket's more important than astronomy, but beyond that, I would say, I mean, this is like great stuff here, just reading it. And, but yeah, I mean, it is more, I think this stuff is very easy to just put it as outreach. And
yeah, I mean, I also teach spin class, but you don't see that in my CV first.
Yeah, so maybe the spin. Yeah, so maybe the things that are clearly nothing to do with astronomy, you can leave out. But I mean, I think so. If you were an Uber driver or something, but yeah.
These do have like astronomy stuff with them, right? I think it's just like changing like, so here it just says like National Park Service. Like I would put up like Night Skies Assistant in bold, right? Like emphasize that this was like having to do with like like astronomy education rather than like the location. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question about the teaching experience.
Yep.
How far back should you go for a postdoc application? Like, if you were, say, for instance, if you were a what do you call it, a teaching assistant in undergrad, should you include that?
Yeah, I would
Absolutely
do that. Yeah, but things that you have done at high school, like tutoring stuff, probably should not be included in the CV.
Right.
I mean, most PhD students applying for a postdoc don't have the problem of like, oh, how do I cut off how much teaching I've done? Because not a lot of us have done a lot of teaching. I mean, I've done very little teaching in America. I think they're a lot better for that. But definitely undergrad stuff, 100%.
If you have something for, so I don't have teaching experience as far as undergrads, and I guess I was wondering where this would fall in on my CV. Would it just be outreach? But I did do something where I was helping educate like elementary school kids about science. Would that fall under outreach?
I think that's outreach.
Okay.
I think it's outreach, but as long as you can, I mean, that's a cool thing. And I think that's, not all outreach is the same. And so I think someone would probably read that and still say, oh, this person, can communicate ideas. And to be honest, explaining hard ideas to elementary kids is as tough as anything. So.
I think that like the outreach and the teaching, again, it depends on what you're applying to. So it is, like David said, that you can communicate. That's an important aspect. But if you're applying to someone's specific postdoc, they're going to care more about that you're a good fit, that you'll be able to do the research that they want you to do. And so having an item or two on your CV is fine, but they're not going to care about all these details. If you're applying to the National Science Foundation Fellowship, where a part of your application is to have a broader impact, then they might care a little bit more that you can demonstrate that you can do these things. So, I mean, like, keep different versions of your CV because, this is going to be great stuff when you apply. You have a ton of teaching assistant experience when you apply for a faculty position. That's fantastic. But like, as a person, like I have a postdoc ad out right now and I'm looking for postdocs, and I'm going to look for someone who I think can do the research that I want to do. That's going to be the fundamental thing.
Yeah, that's why I emphasized earlier that you need to have a master CV. And so that in the future, if you apply for a specific position, first thing you should ask yourself, like, which of the skill set or the things that are listed in my master CV would fit or would be interesting to the people who read the CV. And I would click all the items, choose all the things that are relevant, and rearrange them in a way that it will showcase your strengths and it will interest the people who read the CV. So there is definitely a lot of thoughts that needs to go into each specific version of the CV if you really want that job badly, right? Because, I mean, and this is, again, a bigger question is, during your application, would you cast a wide net or you want to do this sniper mode? You only apply for the things that you're super interested in. There's always this debate. And there's no right or wrong. But the more target you have, the less customized you have for your application package. So there is definitely a balance to keep between like how many application you apply.
I had two other quick notes for Caprice. The first one I was going to say is that in your outreach things, it can be nice if you can summarize, like bullet points of like how many people you think you reached or how many hours or events you did, because like you have all these great different things that you did. And if you can say like, I don't know, just giving some context to how significant all these different events were, I think that would be a great addition. And then I liked your different your different boldings that you had. I thought that was great. For me, this is personal preference, so feel free to disagree. But I think the other thing you'll see on mine is that I did separate the sections a little bit and kind of made the section header a little bit more prominent so that people can find the part that they're looking for. But I think within the sections, you've done a really nice job of being like bolding and separating each thing.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Caprice.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Diego.
Yeah, I just want to ask a quick random question. If you're, I think, well, David talked about this a little bit, but if your mother tongue is not English, should you put that on your CV or not? I mean, let's assume that you're applying to U.S. institutions.
No, I don't think so. Because if you write papers in English, they should not question your English capability.
Right, but like for instance, I mean, I haven't actually done this, but like I would like to give a planetarium show in Spanish, say, right? Like, I guess there like you can get something out of it, right? More than just to say I speak 2 languages.
I would say do that and then put that on your CV. Like I've given, bilingual outreach events. Like that's amazing.
Okay.
That's awesome.
I will just say though that when I came to Ohio State, Scott Gowdy gave me an English test. Just say.
What?
Just saying I had to do an English exam.
The other thing I was going to say
because
he's Australian.
Oh yeah, who knows what these foreigners speak here? I mean, who knows what I can speak?
To Diego, I was also just going to mention that if there's specific information that you want to get across that doesn't fit in your CV, you can also ask your letter writers to put it in. That's like a good place that can add kind of content that's hard to place other places.
All right, I think we need to wrap up. If you still have questions, keep asking. I will post the video later if no one object. Again, thank you so much, Danielle, David, and John for leading the discussion. And I think it's very useful. I mean, everybody learns a lot. So this will be happening bi-weekly. So I have not decided what the topic will be for 2 weeks from now, but yeah, I will send out a reminder or the more details about the workshop for the 2 weeks. And with that, again, everyone have a good weekend. And I will, again, watch this video if you want to, go over what we have discussed. All right, bye everyone.